Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Sweeney here with a round of Mr. Sweeney's tips and tricks. And today I want to show you something that's actually got me a little sad right now. See, this is my Jeep here in the background, and that tire right there is going flat. So what do we do to correct this problem? Well, I could call AAA or one of those places and wait, maybe a couple hours for them to come by and fix the flat, or maybe I could do it myself. Well, perhaps you're one of my middle school students and you're saying, well, why do I need to worry about this? Well, trust me when I say this, at some point in time, you are going to have a flat tire when you start driving. And like I said, you could wait for somebody else to come and do it for you, or you could take it upon yourself to do it by yourself. So I'm going to go through all of the safety steps on this. I'll leave it posted so that if this ever happens later down the line, the resources will be there for you. Let's get started. My warning lights went off on my dashboard, and when I pressed to see what the problem was, I got this indication on there that was rather troubling. As you can see from the post, it looks like one of my tires is down to 28 pounds of pressure, 28 psi, and also over here this little illumination of the flat tire thing is lit up. So Houston, we have a problem. Okay, if you find yourself having to fix a flat tire, one of the first things you're going to want to do is get the owner's manual out. In this case here, I have a really cool 2019 Jeep Wrangler, and you'll get the owner's manual out and take a look at the index in the back. And I've kind of marked this with my fingers here as best as I can, looking up the word tire and then going down to the little subcategory of changing the tire. In my case, shoots off to page 67, and it will show you all of the safety procedures on how to safely change the tire. Everything from chocking it, which I'll demonstrate in a moment, to actually removing the tire, how to use the jack, and so forth. So, all right, there's our owner's manual. Let's get started. In case you haven't noticed, my flat is on the right rear of the car. And one of the most important things you have to do whenever you're going to fix a flat tire on a car is you have to put a chock or a block on the opposite diagonal tire of the car. So in this case here, my tire on the right rear is going flat, and I have two blocks underneath the left front tire. I put blocks in both the front and the back because when you have the car or the vehicle up on a jack, you always run the risk of it possibly rolling off of the jack. And so placing a block of wood in the front and the rear of the opposite tire will hopefully prevent that from happening. Also, if you do have yourself in a situation where you get a flat tire at nighttime, it's always really handy to have one of these in the trunk, a little reflectional triangle that's going to signal to maybe oncoming traffic who might not see you all that well that there is a broken down or disabled vehicle on the side of the road. Relatively inexpensive and highly recommended to keep in the trunk. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on my vehicle here, I'm really very fortunate that I have a full-size spare tire. Sometimes some cars have a much smaller tire. It's referred to as a donut tire sometimes. And the purpose of using a donut tire on a car is to only get you out of a jam if you get a flat tire. So you'll use the donut tire to get to a place to get your permanent tire fixed, and not use the donut tire to drive around town, because the size of the donut tires are usually considerably smaller than the regular tires. Again, this is a full-size tire on my Jeep. Okay, we've got two different kind of jacks here. This particular jack is the one that comes with the vehicle, and it's called a scissors jack. And basically what happens is when you turn this, the jack raises and lowers. And you use this device here when you push the jack underneath the car to loop in here and then crank up and then crank it down. I'm not going to use the scissor jack because I've got another kind of a jack here. This is called a hydraulic jack. And basically, you shove the hydraulic jack underneath the car, of course making sure that it's chopped up, as I was saying, and you jack this up and you see the lift portion of the jack raising as I pump the handle. And then of course, to let the jack down, you would just loosen that and the jack drops back down. And I've looked in the owner's manual and determined that they want you to place the jack underneath the axle right inside the tire. So we've done that. I've got the jack inserted and I'm jacking the car up. I'm going to stop right there for just a moment, and you'll notice that the tire is not quite off of the ground. And the reason why we want to hold off on that first is because we want to do this. Okay, these parts here that are holding the tire on are referred to as the lug nuts. And this is a lug wrench that comes with the tire change kit in your car. And before you raise the tire off of the ground, you want to make sure that you do what's called cracking the lugs loose first. And if you don't do that and you try to loosen the lug nuts up, with the tire jacked up in the air, the tire is going to spin and it's going to be very difficult. So I've got it just started to jack it up just a little bit, but I do still have tire contact on the ground here. And I'm going to place the lug wrench on there, and I'm going to push down in a downward motion like that to loosen the lug nut up. You can pull up like this, but it's not recommended that you do that because now you're having to use strength as opposed to with the wrench on the other way using your body weight. If you use strength to pull up on this, it's actually not a good idea because you can have a possibility of straining a lot of the muscles underneath your arm here. So use your weight. You want to work smart, not work hard. Loosen all the lug nuts up until they're all loose, just a little bit, just enough so that you can turn it by hand, but do not take them off until you get the car jacked up. Okay, so now that we've loosened up the lug nuts a little bit, we're going to proceed to jack the car up. This part of the job here is the part where you want to really be patient and just kind of watch and see how things are going. If you see the car start to slip off of the jacker or something just doesn't look quite right, you want to immediately let the jack down and try to correct the problem. The tire looks like it's still making contact on the ground. And once you get it off the ground, you'll notice that there's a lot of movement. That should do the trick for that. Okay, so in the beginning of the video, I introduced you to this part here called a lug wrench, and this is a part that usually comes with your tool packet in your tire changing compartment. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm cheating with a hydraulic jack, which I feel is a little bit more stable to use than a scissors jack, but I've also got this thing here. It's called a spinner wrench. And this spinner wrench has 4 different sizes of lug nuts that would fit in there. So I'm going to find the one that is comparable. The reason why I like using the spinner wrench is because if I'm going to do this, sometimes the spinner wrench tends to go a little bit quicker. I've got a lot of these loosened already. And while I'm taking these lug nuts out, I'm going to leave 2 corners, 2 opposite corners in first. One low and one high, if at all possible. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to try to keep this tire on the car as long as possible. The time that you have it off of the car is the most dangerous time. So you want to get the tire transferred off and then the new one back on in no time flat. So if a lug nut does tend to bind on you a little bit, you can take the lug wrench and you can use that to spin it off. Also, the one other thing I do want to recommend is that before you start this process, you'll definitely want to have your tire out and ready to go. And it's always a good idea to, whenever you get the tire pressure checked in your car, to make sure that you check the spare also. At this point, I'm going to make sure that I try to do everything as quickly as I possibly can without jarring the car too much. And then I'm going to roll my other tire in, making sure that that tire is out of the way. I'm going to roll this one in and I'm going to put it back on. Before we do that though, I do want to talk to you about some of the mechanism that's under here. This would be a shout out to my 8th grade class because we were studying hydraulic and pneumatic units in the classroom. And this is the brake disc right here. The rotor is referred to as a rotor. And these are the brake pads back here and then the caliper. And when a person steps on the brakes inside the car, the caliper actually squeezes down on the brake pads and causes the rotor to stop turning and brakes the car. And so it's a pretty ingenious little idea here. Now we're going to put the tire back on. And this can be a little challenging to do because it's kind of hard to line up the lug nuts. The important thing is to do this without putting your legs or your arms underneath the car itself. And so this big tire on this Jeep is a little challenging to get on. But I wanted to just pause the video. I didn't want to waste your time while I tried to wrestle with this. And so we're getting 2 lug nuts secured on there as quickly as we possibly can so that if the car should fall off of the jack, it will land on the tire and not damage any of the components in there. I'm going to tighten this one, these 2 lug nuts. Not super tight, but just tight enough that they're snug. And then at this point, I feel that the vehicle's safe and I can continue to put the remainder of the lug nuts on. And notice I'm alternating, okay? If you have a car that has 6 lug nuts, you'll want to alternate every other one, but cut yourself a little slack. Most cars have 5. And if they have 5, you can usually go 1, 3, 5, and then 2 and 4, and then just keep going like that. And that's how you would actually tighten the tire, by alternating every other one. Now that you've got the lug nuts somewhat snug, with the car jacked up in the air, it's time that we can carefully lower the jack. So when you lower the jack, if you have a hydraulic jack like the one that I have here, you don't want to let the jack down hard. You want to let it down slowly and gradually. If you have the scissors jack, that'll of course go as fast as you turn it to loosen it up. So here we go. A little bit at a time. And after you complete that process, clear the jack out and get your lug wrench and tighten these up. You want to make sure when you tighten them up, again, the exact opposite direction, lefty loosey, righty tighty. You don't want to pull up, because if you're pulling up again, you're using muscle, and you don't want to use muscle, you want to use weight. Tighten them down like that. Skipping, 1, 3. Skipping again, skip a lug nut, skip a lug nut, and then now I should have them all tightened up. I'm going to go back around one more time. And you want to do this, by the way, with your lug wrench and not the spinner wrench. The spinner wrench is nice for doing things quickly, but when it comes to actually tightening the lug nuts down the tires, that's the best way to go. So my son and I are going to run this down, get the tire fixed, and bring it back, and we'll swap this thing out. There's another round of Mr. Sweeney's tips and tricks. Keep this one in the back of your mind. Maybe one day if you're broke down on the side of the road, you might need to reference back to this video.